Hey guys, what's up? Andrew from American Musical Supply here at the Zildjian Factory. I'm here with Paul Francis, who is considered by most to be the cymbal master, or the cymbal whisperer. Maybe?
Thank you. I don't know.
We're going to be talking about picking out cymbals today, because you may be wondering, especially if you're shopping around on the AMS website, how do I go about picking out a set of cymbals that are going to fulfill the needs that I have as a drummer for the gigs that I play? So, Paul, I understand Zildjian has a couple of different families of cymbals.
Yep.
So maybe you could talk us through like the A family first, and
Sure.
Explain what would be good for what and how you go about putting a set together.
Okay. So we have a couple different types of sounds. We have A Zildjian that I'm pretty sure that everyone's familiar with. It's a brighter sound, and there's subsets from the A Zildjian sound. A Zildjian really kind of set the precedent for modern cymbal sounds as we know it today.
Gotcha.
We have a lot to thank Avidus Zildjian III for. What we know as cymbals and how cymbal making is approached now is because of all the work that he did in the early 20th century. But A Zildjians, they're kind of the desert island set of cymbals. If you're stuck somewhere and you have to play any style of music, okay, and if you only could have 3 cymbals in a set of hi-hats, you're playing a 20-inch medium ride, a 16 and 18-inch medium thin crash, and a set of 14-inch new beat hi-hats.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that's kind of your all-purpose sound. When we like to say here at Zildjian that when people think of a cymbal crash sound, what they're really hearing in their head is an 18-inch Zildjian cymbal. It's an 18-inch A Zildjian crash cymbal. That's kind of the gold standard. Okay. From the A's, you have a little bit of a sweeter, smoother sound, glassier sound, which is a custom. And that was developed back in 1991, 1992. This is our 25th anniversary of A Custom. And that, again, was the company following the needs of the drummers that were trying to make music at that time. They needed that type of sound. And more recently, a couple of years ago, we came out with the Avidus cymbals. And that's our best recreation of the vintage cymbals. Well, they're vintage now, but what Avidus was doing in the 30s, 40s. And the Avidus are really, they hover around the 1950s. So these are the cymbals that if you're a big fan of swing music like Gene Krupa, Joe Jones, Buddy Rich, and Charlie Watts and Keith Moon and Ringo Starr, they were all playing those types of cymbals. There was only one style that Avidus made, and so people were swinging on it and people were creating rock and roll. So that's a real kind of vintage type of sound, and the finish on that is that patina finish that we originally developed for the Choral series, and I'll talk about K in a minute. So you have 3 different types of sounds in the A line. You have the regular A's, and they're real kind of cutting and have a bite to it. The A customs are a little bit smoother, and then if you're looking for that just vintage sound where they're just cymbals, there's no model names on the Avidus, you want to go with that. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
So from the A series, we also have the K's, which is named after Karapi Zildjian, and he ran the foundry over there. I believe it was from 1865 to 1909 or something like that. Usually I'm not rusty with facts, but right now I am. So the reason that the K's are different is because of the way that the metal was worked. Mm-hmm. The technology at the time was to take a blank out of the tempering tank, and you'd have a hammer and a stump with an anvil on it, and it would be hammered into shape. So you would work the metal and you would shape it at the same time. Because the hammer marks were all over the place, it created for kind of a funkier, dirtier sound, coupled with how they used to put the bells in the cymbals. A lot of people don't know that there used to be 2 guys that when it came time to putting the cup in the cymbal, each one would have a sledgehammer that would have a peen ground into it. And they would put it on kind of like a rough mold, and one guy would swing, the next guy would swing, and they do this 4 or 5 times on a pile of cymbals. So the one that got smacked first, right, had the deepest cup, and then the one on the bottom of the pile had shallow. So the whole K Zildjian sound that people have come to know and love, there was no one particular model. It's how the cymbals came out, and they came out dark and funky and dirty. So we're replicating that kind of style of cymbal now.
Okay.
So K Zildjian started to be made here in this factory around 1982. Okay, and from there we did K Custom Dark, and that was the first cymbal that was actually kind of on a thinner end, over-hammered, kind of dry it out a little bit more. And then K Constantinople. And those actually started off as orchestral cymbals. And what Armin Zildjian wanted to do with that project was he wanted to recreate hand cymbals like his ancestors made that were like 100 years old sounding. They were really dark and dirty and funky. And the way that it was described for the K Constantinople sound originally was if you were to hear a gladiator's sword hit another gladiator's shield. And the way it was described to me is that the K Zildjian sound in an orchestra supports from underneath. And the A Zildjian type of orchestral cymbals would play above the orchestra. They were bright and pretty and flowery, and these supported underneath. So that's how the K Constantinople started, and then they were really great sounding and successful. So the company morphed into making ride cymbals. We did 20 and 22-inch light and medium, and then just through more product development, we got into thin highs and thin lows, and medium thin highs and medium thin lows, and then high bells, and we just kind of went for it.
Gotcha.
With different sounds. So that's really kind of the quintessential Zildjian jazz cymbal that a lot of the people are playing. But you have a lot of rock drummers playing them too because of the sounds of music being made now. There's a lot of darker, lower pitched sounds. And then we came out with the Choral some years ago, and that really harkened back to more of the manufacturing over in Turkey when Zildjian was doing stuff with like the sledgehammers. So the Choral cups and all the cymbals start off very, very shallow, and then after they come out of the tempering tank, we reshape every single cup to a new shape with a hammer, so every single cup is different. So that lends itself to a very, very individualistic Choral. There's a Choral sound, but it's not identical. So it wouldn't be as tight as an A or an A Custom. So.
Gotcha.
And then, the K Custom series, which is different than the K Custom Darks. The K Custom is where we do a lot of exploring. So we just redesign the K Custom Special Dries. We have all kinds of different types of K Customs that lend themselves more to like a darker type of coloration, but gives us more freedom where we're not interrupting kind of the regular Ks and stuff like that. So that's where the funky kind of K Custom stuff live.
So when you were putting together a cymbal set, how do you go about picking cymbals that work together? Do you look for, okay, I want to have a 16-inch crash that's really fast, and I want to have like an 18 that has a little more sustain and more body to it, and then have a ride that I can crash on as well as kind of ride? How would you go about putting a set together for that?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but before I answer it, let me answer it this way, okay? A lot of drummers tend to pick the same sounding cymbals regardless of the diameter. And when you're putting a set of cymbals together, you want to make sure that you have colors, because really what drummers are doing is they're expressing themselves through the music with emotion, and you want your cymbals to color the music. So if you're only going to have one crash cymbal, let's say you're going to have a ride, a crash, and a set of hats, you want that cymbal to be kind of medium thin, all right? So you can get a quick crash out of it if you need to, but also a longer crash out of it. You want to have, if you have a smaller cymbal like a 16, like you just mentioned, that's going to be brighter, and then you want another one that's going to be darker, because you don't want the sameness, because that becomes boring. All the cymbals should be clear sounding. You should be able to ride on the cymbal and crash it, okay, regardless of what the name is on there. You don't want the cymbals to sound muddy You don't want them to be too floppy, because if they're too floppy, they won't project. They won't get past the front bass drum hoop. Ride cymbals, whether it's high-pitched or low-pitched, you want a nice clean stick, a bell that you can hear, with the exception of Carope, because the bells aren't supposed to be chimey. So let me just say that. And if you need a ride that crashes, you want something that's going to be medium or under in weight, like, you know, crash ride or medium thin in weight. Hi-hats, you want a nice, you know, clean chick. And if you need a lot of coloration, you want to go with a lighter top. You know, so you might want to lean toward, you know, some Avidus hats or some K-Custom Dark type of hats where you have a thin top with an extra heavy bottom.
Gotcha.
So that extra heavy bottom is always going to give you that solid chick. And we have to give a shout out to Louis Belson, because he's the one that, you know, really brought that whole new beat hi-hat gold standard as we know it now, to have that really crystal clear chick all the time. And
so if I'm shopping around online and, you know, looking, you know, say there isn't a drum shop near me where I can go and check something out. I'm looking around online, so I'm going to look for a medium thin crash. If I wanted 3 cymbals in a set plus a set of hi-hats, I'm going to go for a medium thin, like 16.
Yep.
And 18 was also like a medium thin.
Or you could go thin, because you want color. So
Okay.
if your 16 is going to be medium thin, go with an 18-inch thin.
Okay.
Okay. And you don't have to stay in the same series. You know, so if you want some drastic colorations, you can go with a 16-inch, you know, a Zildjian medium thin crash, and go with an 18-inch K-Dot crash thin.
Okay.
I mean, that's gonna it's gonna be beautiful.
So what if we wanted to put a set together like that, maybe? Like, so if we were looking for a 16 that had a you know, some sort of A that was a medium thin.
Yep.
An 18-inch dark crash, and then maybe some sort of K ride.
Sure.
What would you suggest? Is there some that we can pick out
Yep.
and we can check them out?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.